Really nice to see you here today. Um, we've got a really big topic that we're looking at today, which has this very large title of running a youth organization in a changing world. And I think everybody will know that the world is shifting very rapidly, both for our organizations and how we keep them being sustainable, but also for the young people that we're working with and the and their experience of the world around them and how they interact with the support that's offered to them. So we're going to be covering a number of topics as we go through today. As we said, please ask any questions that you want into the chat box, and we'll try to deal with those at the end. So what are we going to be looking at? The first piece is going to be a piece around basically framing the horizon. So some stuff around how public sector pressures, capital build realities, the things that are happening for your organizations are playing out in real time and how they are having an impact on what we do in the youth sector. We're going to move on then to looking at navigating a changing landscape, huge shifts in political in the world of politics, which are really changing how local politics is run, the distribution of money, and also quite a lot of statutory uncertainty and political uncertainty, which can all play into making it quite difficult to plan how your organisation works over the next couple of years. We're going to then look at some long-term financial resilience stuff around what those things are that are impacting on organizations' financial stability and some ideas about how you might be looking to address some of those. Big piece, which I think is really important about this huge change in technology. We're in an age where technology is moving at a rate that can seem really difficult to keep up with. And that's not just for us, that's for the young people that we're working with as well. So it's having an impact on both how we do our jobs and also on how young people experience the world around them, what they engage with, how they work. And so we're going to look at that and also a little bit about how policy might be affecting some of that stuff as well. Um, a quick look at uncertain futures. We're sitting in the middle of another heat wave, and climate realities, the mental health crisis that some of that technology stuff previously will be feeding into as well. And those sort of emerging youth needs, which might be setting the frame for what your organizations need to be thinking about as they move into as they move beyond having their build done and starting to get a new program running out of their buildings. And we're going to be finishing up with a kind of 5-point strategic compass, which is basically just saying, here's a set of questions that as people on the boards or the leadership of youth organizations, you should be asking. The answers to them will be different for every single organization. The things that people need to do are not the same, but the questions remain the same. How do we react to the following things, and what do we need to be considering as we go through that? And put simply, the simple message is that for all of our organizations, for the young people we support, things are changing very rapidly. It can be really difficult to think about how an organization strategizes what it does during that and leading it through that strategy when you're not really sure what the world's going to look like in 5 years' time. And, many of the things that you may have expected to happen simply work in a very different way when you get there. Your buildings present a set of opportunities in a very difficult environment. You've basically been given a huge asset, but that asset isn't going to work for itself. It needs a set of stuff around it to make it work. So building the approaches, the relationships, the knowledge to capitalize on the opportunity that the building gives you is absolutely critical to making it a success. For me, leading through uncertain times is about having a plan. And there's the old expression that no plan survives contact with the enemy. Well, no plan does survive contact with reality. Things change over time, but if you haven't got a plan, you've got no basis to then kind of change and adapt as things shift around you. And so now, from my point of view, it's time really to look at your strategy. And it boils down to asking two questions. What does my organization need to do differently to remain relevant? And what does my organization need to do differently to be sustainable? And once you've answered those questions, hopefully that puts you in a much better place. So the first big change that's happening for leaders in our sector, particularly the ones who've had access to the Youth Investment Fund capital grants, is that they have just gone through a period of enormous turbulence, or in some cases are still going through a period of enormous turbulence in their organizations, with buildings being closed, buildings being renovated, having to move services into other locations, or in some cases to shut stuff down and reopen it. Um, and that in itself is a massive shock, this capital shock that this huge amount of money has been dropped into organizations. And in many cases, that money is significantly larger than the turnover of the organizations in question, which brings in all sorts of other challenges around how you grant fundraise, but also simply managing money that is at a level that you would not have normally expected. Um, and frankly, this can be overwhelming. We've seen this at a lot of the central support events that have been run over the past couple of years. That people who are very capable of running their youth organisations, have deliver excellent outcomes and wonderful things for the young people who attend, are suddenly being asked to manage something very different than that. They're being asked to manage a capital build, and their knowledge and expertise is not in that area. And I think there is a natural tendency when you've got this very large thing happening to your organization to take your eye off the ball a set of other things. And the most frequent ones that we're seeing with that is taking your eye off the ball of where the money comes from for revenue, because you're so busy worrying about the capital that the revenue kind of is allowed to slide. And then the second part is taking the eye off the ball of what's changing and what you need to do differently once the building's built, that we're so focused on getting the thing done that we haven't done the planning, the relationship building, all the stuff that we need to then fill it and make it work for us and make it sustainable, make it generate income, all the stuff that people hope will happen when they build one of these things. Um, and maintaining purpose. These builds were supposed to be an accelerator of mission. They were supposed to create opportunity and drive impact of organizations by giving them the wonderful spaces that young people can then access, and also that can then add to the sustainability of organizations. And they sometimes have become a distraction, and sometimes they have led to being a kind of substitute for strategic direction, because we're so focused on the one thing that we're not looking at the bigger picture of where our organizations are going, what's changing around us, and what we might need to do differently in the future. So I think the first thing to say in that is that nobody's underestimating what people who've been through a youth investment fund build have been through. They've experienced a very difficult set of circumstances, a huge challenge for their organizations, but they've also been given a massive, massive asset that they can then work with. The the first thing I wanted to really look at, and I guess this is hugely topical and pertinent at the moment, is that the political landscape in which we're operating is changing all the time and changing really, really rapidly. The May local elections created a kind of seismic shift in across the country in terms of how power at the local level was distributed, and how and who was holding that power and what their priorities might have been. And so for many organizations who had kind of existing relationships, certainty, maybe knew their local politicians really well, the scale of that shift has been really quite surprising. Fundamentally, that means that there have been these very large local democratic shifts, particularly to reform the Green Party, to independence, and to no overall control. So we've got councils that had controlling parties and are now in a state of some flux, because no party is no party is in control. And then we have these very inexperienced and often very ideologically driven parties moving into that space, who will have their own ideas about what needs to happen in the communities around them. So priorities will be shifting. And alongside that, the people who are coming into those roles as councillors are entering a world where local authority budgets are already in crisis. So the prioritization of statutory provision, um, which accounts for at least 80+% of what councils spend. So things that they are required to do by law has become the absolute kind of the thing that they have to focus on most. And one of the things that we know is that youth provision is not one of those things. Loads of stuff in there about their responsibilities towards children. But for a lot of our organisations, the type of activity we do is not a statutory requirement of local authorities. Um, and you see that in this cut in youth spending, which is both a cut in councils' direct youth spending on themselves and also the youth services that they deliver, and also a cut in the money that they distribute out into the voluntary sector to deliver youth services. So 76% real terms cut in council youth spending since 2010, about 1.3 billion less money. I've seen other estimates to put it even higher than that. And now, because of that cut, VCSE organisations deliver almost all youth provision in this country. There are still council youth services, but they tend to be very small. They tend to be very localized into very specific places. And probably 69, 70% of all youth provision in the country is now delivered by charities and social enterprises. That gives us an opportunity as well as creating a challenge, because what it's changed is that we can now describe this sector as being something that is led by the voluntary sector. It's not led by the public sector. It's not predominantly funded by the public sector. And charities and social enterprises are no longer a sort of optional, nice add-on to create a youth sector that works. We are the essential infrastructure in most places around the country. And without us, there is no youth provision at all. So being able to make that argument and being able to sort of make that argument within your own local context is going to be a really important part of getting this right. As you watch those political positions change and the leadership of local authorities change, then it can be really quite challenging to think about what do we do as organisations in the face of it, especially where there may be things that some of those parties believe that we are not very well aligned with as organisations, and where some of the things that we do may not align themselves very well with what they believe. Um, the the approach that has been advocated by the national infrastructure bodies, and I think is probably right, is this one of pragmatic localism. That organisations that are working in the voluntary sector start looking at what they achieve in a local place and translate their mission and what they do into a set of universal local priorities. So not losing your core focus, not saying that we're going to compromise our values or our mission or any of that stuff, but really focusing on what do the people who are going to be responsible for budgets need to hear from us. So how do I describe the work that I do in terms that they will understand and appreciate and want to support? So this kind of works itself to translating your value, framing your impact around outcomes that every local politician of any party supports. So reducing antisocial behaviour, employability skills, civic responsibility, some of those things which you really can see that any party will accept, and in many cases you may need to reframe them into the language that that party uses and understands. But you can describe youth work wherever you work in those ways. It's also worth noting that some of the things that we in this sector excel at and talk about very extensively and very well may not play well in all of those political arenas. So narratives around diversity and inclusion may not be playing well with all politicians. If that's the case, I think our job is not to try and force that issue into the arena. It's to say, well, actually, we're still delivering things that you do care about. You may not care about that bit, but you do care about, young people's opportunity. You do care about economic prosperity. You do care about a set of things that we are a direct contributor to. For charities, we also have to think about the requirement on those organisations for political neutrality. So Charity Commission produces extensive guidance on this. Doesn't say that we can't challenge people, and we should. We absolutely should talk about the things that are important to young people, and diversity, equality, inclusion are absolutely at the heart of what's important to young people. Climate change is at the heart of what's important to young people. But we must also do that in a non-party political way. And doing it in that way helps us to maintain the relationship with all of the different political groups that we might be having to work with. One of the things that I think your youth investment fund build gives you is an asset that can act as a unifier. So the fact that you've got something sitting inside a particular ward or a particular town that is now a massive asset for young people is a tangible kind of neutral asset that can bridge political divides that anyone can get behind. So taking the opportunity to really look at your building and say, okay, well, can this act as a great neutral space for people to come together and to do stuff is a really, really big part of that. And then alongside that, there's this other big shift. This regional shift that a lot of things that were the preserve of local authorities are now moving away from London and local authorities towards combined authorities and regional mayors. And that means that as youth organisations, we need to have a very different set of relationships with the sort of political and democratic structures above us. Lots of money is appearing in a very different way. So single combined budgets, large multi-year budgets instead of lots and lots of small scattered grants that might have been distributed by local authorities. And all of that favors partnership and collaboration. You know, everything that we're going to say today, I think, favors partnership and collaboration and bringing organizations together to create collective voice, to do lobbying and impact collectively, and really explain the value of youth work in a way that can be understood at the scale at which the money is being given out. So regional mayors have typically been quite good at treating youth spaces as an important part of their regional economies, particularly Andy Burnham in Manchester with the Manchester Youth Task Force and the Young Persons Guarantee has got youth built into a lot of the stuff that they talk about. And I think there is an opportunity for us to do an enormous amount more of that work in the other metro regions by collaborating, by forming those partnerships, but also by changing our focus of how we talk about what we're doing, remembering that combined authorities have real focus on job readiness, they have real focus on crime and community safety, they have real focus on training and education. They're probably less focused on the kind of drop-in and leisure type activities that many youth centres do. But all of those youth centres also do all of this other stuff. You know, when people attend those sessions, they are also learning the skills that they need in the world of work. They're also learning the responsibility and the relationships and all of the things that they need to get on well in life. So an increasing focus on the things that are important to the people with the money, which for me is just a matter of describing what we do in the right way rather than changing what we do. And then an increasing focus, I think, on the local partnerships that enable that to happen. So the key takeaways from that, I think youth groups need to team up locally to influence and bid together. So if you're not part of a local partnership already, now might be the time to be thinking about, is there one already there? And if there isn't, do we need to convene one? Do we need to bring together the youth organisations across our region to say, we're going to collectively do some of this work as a group? Really important to keep your finger on the pulse of changing power budgets and priorities. So as money and influence shift, if you're not following that shift and on top of it, you can find that things that you were certain about that you used to get support from, people you used to get support from have moved on, and you kind of start to lose your contact with the things that make you sustainable. So really important that we are taking the time as leaders not just to do what we do as organizations, but to do what one of my colleagues describes as swanning around, the bit which is about building relationships. And it can seem often that when we're doing that stuff, we're not doing our job, but actually, in many cases, that is the job. The job is to keep those relationships good and positive and constructive and focused on the outcomes that we're creating for young people. cultivating new relationships with budget holders, investing time and energy into maintaining good relationships with the ones that we already have, making sure that we're reading the things that we need to read about the changes that are happening in terms of budgets and in terms of local priorities. Um, and finally, reframe your activities and impact around local and regional priorities. Don't change your activities and impact because your purpose needs to remain your purpose, but framing what you say about them in a way that is clearly attached to what people are expecting to see in those areas is really important. Consider what your audience needs to hear, not what you want to tell them. And one great example of that already happening is up in Sunderland with Sunderland Altogether Consortium CIO. This was a group of youth organisations in Sunderland who had difficult relationships over the years. You know, they're quite open about the fact that one of the big challenges in doing that work is how you get a group of CEOs who may have been in competition with one another in the past to sit round a table and do stuff together. But they've managed to have those conversations and been open and frank and have now established Sunderland Altogether as an independent charity that has members from all of those organisations within it and can act as that real that real kind of focus of attracting investment into the youth sector, of being able to talk to combined authorities, being able to talk to the health service, being able to talk to at a level that the individual organisations may struggle to do. Um, this has been done really successfully in the health system, you know, for many, many years. That health organisations have been better at creating those partnerships that talk to the health, that talk to the health service than youth organisations have been at doing that in the same way. Um, so I think, you know, if you're sitting in a local area and you're looking at what we could do, going and looking at the Altogether Consortium is one of those, one of those things to do. You may feel that they've gone further than you want to do because a partnership doesn't have to end up creating a whole new charity to do that. It can be just a group of people and a group of organisations doing stuff together with agreements in place around how they do it. But also this provides a model of how you could do it. The second really important one that we come to is long-term financial resilience, and there's no sort of easy sugarcoating of this one. The financial situation of the voluntary sector generally is not in good health at the moment. The challenges in the system are becoming more and more acute all the time. And even in the time that we've been doing the Youth Investment Fund program, we've seen people's success rate with bids drop. We've seen people's challenges around money increase. And there are lots and lots of reasons for them, for this. Um, some of them on the screen in front of you, but increased competition for grant funding. Lots and lots of grant funders are saying that they are getting between 20 and 50% more applications than they were getting even just 10 years ago. Yeah. So the number of applications being received is significantly higher. A larger number of those applications are asking for the full amount of, the maximum amount that the grant can give. Um, and significant numbers of organizations are finding that bids that they thought were going to be successful, that the kind of, the nailed on ones that you always thought you would get, even down at the level of things like Awards for All, where people would have been very, very, very certain that they would get an Awards for All bid, that the rejection rates are increasing all the time. And that is it's not suddenly everyone getting worse at bid writing, and it's not really the organization suddenly, the funders suddenly putting higher standards on stuff. It is simply the weight of bids that they're receiving and the inability of them to meet demand. The Alongside that, there's been this sort of reduced availability of large multi-year grants because those are the ones that everybody is piling into. And when you look at where the really massive increases in applicants are happening, it's around those, the things like reaching communities from the lottery where they're giving you a multi-year grant. So back 23 years ago when I started this job, those big grants might have got 6 applicants for every grant that they gave out. Today it's 30. Yeah. So that's 29 disappointed people who spent a lot of time writing a bid. Um, So a really difficult set of circumstances for any organisation around grant funding. Um, there are also a set of shifting local priorities and budget constraints, and we talked about those in relation to local authorities. But those are not the only places where things are changing. You know, the NHS is changing very rapidly in how it distributes money and how it has relationships with the voluntary sector. Central government money continues to focus very heavily on capital across the whole of the voluntary sector. Lots and lots of money has been distributed, just like the Youth Investment Fund, over recent years to improve the capital stock and to create better buildings with the intention that that would also improve the sustainability of those organisations. Um, but we do hear quite often that, people would like to see more money flowing into the revenue in the doing rather than just into the buildings. Um, Ultimately, across the country, there is a really, really big shift in focus onto health, and that is a completely understandable focus. It's where the government spends the vast majority of its kind of social budgets is on people's health. It's an aging population. It's a population that where ill health is costing more and more on year. And so the focus has become very much one on if you can get health right, then other things like unemployment inactivity improve because you've done that. So for lots of youth organizations whose focus has always been on talking about young people in certain terms around aspiration, around achievement, all those things, actually there needs to be a refocus to make it fit the current thing that people are doing. We've seen some really good examples of organizations starting to introduce health as an outcome measure and introduce services that help young people with their health. And we'll talk about some of those in a little bit. Um, there is also, of course, a cost of living crisis that can't be ignored and a reduction in donations from the public and businesses. So across the board, the money is decreasing. Money in grants is increasing, but it's increasing not as fast as inflation has been over the past few years. Money in donations and put from the business and the general public is decreasing. And so what we have there is a situation where there is less money. And there is less money in a world where there are an enormous number more voluntary sector organisations than there were even 20 years ago. And we're suffering from significant inflation at the same time. So you're seeing things become more expensive when there's less money to pay for them and there's more people competing for that money. And that for any organization should be making them think, well, I need to do something about that. I need to think about that. You may have seen my lovely wheel of income before, but I'm going to put it into every single presentation I ever do because I think it's that important. And I think it's a really critical part of thinking about the strategy of your organizations is to think about all the possible ways that the voluntary sector makes money, all the ways that youth organizations make money, not just the ones that have worked for you historically. And to think about how you get that balance in there. So, we have on there grants and of various different types. We've got all the stuff which is about just people donating money, businesses donating money, commissioning and contracts from the public sector, from the NHS, from councils, from combined authorities, trading, which we would be really hoping your buildings are enabling you to think more about, that you can make more income from renting rooms, doing that sort of work. Loans and community investment, where those things can be used to unlock trading opportunities or to increase donations. They are, they are something that you should be considering. And then crowdfunding as well. And I guess what we would say about this wheel, and we do this in my organization. I try to get other organizations to do it, is to really sit down and go, where's our money now? Where are we invested on this wheel? And where could we do more? Where are the opportunities around that wheel? And how do we create a more balanced profile in what we do? If we're completely reliant on grants today, we're subject to shocks when grants become unavailable. How do we get more balance into our income mix? And if just sitting down with the board, sitting down with the leadership team and looking at that, saying, how do we do this, I think is a really important thing to do. One of the really key things at this point I think is about saying I've got a building, I've got something new and hopefully working from a youth perspective, but what else can it do? Yeah. So how can I position my building as an engagement hub more generally? How can I make it be a critical part of the infrastructure of delivery into communities in the place that it is? And how can I use the fact that it's now been refurbished and has, more presence and that sort of stuff to do that? So the first part of that is changing the value proposition, offering space for service delivery. We know that youth buildings are often unused at certain times of the day. They're often underused at other times of the day. What could be running from those buildings, and how do I go about offering that to people rather than simply hoping that people will turn up at my door, knock on the door, and say, "Can I rent your rooms?" Yeah, really seriously shifting focus from other statutory bodies and funding sources. If you're currently reliant on grants from charitable purposes and local authorities, thinking about what you can do with the health system, thinking about how you engage with combined authorities, maybe as you're on your own or with other organizations, thinking about framing what you do around the needs of housing associations, and then really importantly, thinking about private sector social value commitments, particularly when you're in an area where you've got major developments taking place. How do you position yourselves to be a partner with some of those big contractors who can then put money back into your organizations and also provide opportunities for your young people? Um, Really importantly, co-location models. So, in my spare time, I'm the chair of a large mental health charity that's just done a £3 million towns fund build. Um, and in the process of renovating and extending the building that we have and turning it into this incredible health hub, one of the absolute core considerations was who else needs to be in this building? Who else can we bring in here? What space and capacity have we got to get people into this? And now there are two other charities and the NHS co-located within that building. Um, and between those four organisations, the sustainability of the building is absolutely assured because then, the rental income that the charities pay and the much better rental income that the NHS pays enables that organisation to cover the costs of running the building. Um, Positioning your modern, attractive, efficient buildings as the sites where people want to work from, people want to be in. Understanding your unique purpose, your reach and impact, and again, framing them in the terms that statutory partners understand and can engage with. So why are we the people you should be working with? Well, because we do what you want to see happen. And again, I'm going to keep banging a drum for this one. Consortiums and place-based alliances, partnering with other groups and using your building as one of the things that helps to bring those people on board rather than competing with them. So some takeaways from that: reviewing your income mix, look at trading opportunities, map assets of your organization and the capacity of your building against local need, look for the gaps, and then actively go and approach people to come and be part of, to use your building. Don't wait for them to turn up. Consider tiered pricing structures. So just as I was saying about the charity that I work with, um, we have a very different rate that we charge the NHS than we charge a local VCSE organisation, and thinking about how you tier some of those prices to make them to maximise the income from the people who have the power to pay. Co-locate services to meet building costs. So bring people in and, think about all those things you could be doing. NHS, occupational therapies, corporate training days, early years groups, local college outreach, other VCSE organisations. The list is endless of people who could use your space. It's about finding the ones who need it, and really thinking about who they are. And again, developing that funder messaging, focus on impact, funder priorities, talk to them about the fact that your new buildings with their lower building overheads mean that more money goes straight out to the frontline delivery of youth work. Because that in itself is a message that makes you a more attractive organisation to be funded. One of the youth grantees that we've been working with over the past couple of years has been the Florrie. Um, and they've done some of this income mix shift, which I think has been really important for the organisation. So they built a purpose-built youth space in the basement of the building, has all sorts of stuff we'll talk about in a minute around kind of digital, so podcast booths and wonderful studio space, and a cinema and a youth hub. What that means is that they've now got more capacity in the rest of their building. So the spaces that their youth services were using before are now able to be rented out. Other organisations have been able to step in and take both office space and rent space to do events and activities within it. Um, the Florey now generates about 60% of its entire income just through trading. And that's it. That's that kind of shifting dial of saying, well, we could just be grant funded, or we could be funded, just be funded by trading. Now, we'd like to get a balance of something in there. So if half your money comes from grants and half of it comes from trading, you're doing really well. But go out and have a look at what other people are doing. There's nothing better than going and looking at other youth organisations that look similar to you. Go and look at their accounts on the Charity Commission and say, where does their money come from? Because that can help you to really think about what you could be doing as an organisation. The next, I guess, massive shift that's happening in the world is that technology is accelerating at a rate that I don't think any of us really anticipated. Um, and that can be incredibly daunting in terms of both thinking about your own organization, but also then thinking about how young people are going to engage with those organizations in the future. And then thinking about the things that you need to do as policy for young people shifts around that as well. So broadly speaking, that changing digital world is a screen first world. The natural place for many young people is to start with their screen. Ofcom recently did research into children's habits and asked them which things they liked doing most. And what gaming and watching TV or films on streaming services were the top two free time activities for 8 to 17-year-olds. So, and significantly ahead of even socializing with friends. So for young people, the screen is where they start out. Yeah. And alongside that, an awful lot of influences and changes are happening that they are then engaging with. So AI is now a huge part of young people's lives. So if you look at young people who are just know they're using AI and trying to use AI to do things for them, so using generative AI to create content, to do their schoolwork, all those sort of things. Over 50% of 8 to 17-year-olds now say they do that. But when you then dig under that and say, well, how many of you were really using AI doing something that you didn't know was AI, that rises to nearer to sort of 90% odd. And young people are not really understanding AI necessarily. So they have a massively higher confidence that AI is giving them accurate results than adults do. We tend to know that it's sometimes wrong. Um, And about 25% of young people are completely unable to identify AI content when they're shown it. So AI images and doctored images and those sort of things, they just can't tell that what they're looking at is not real. And so that whole thing that the camera never lies has now become a kind of it's just not true anymore. And then people's relationships are shifting, and 55% of young people who game say they regularly play games with people they've never met in person. So they have online friends who they have never met. And I guess I was the first generation that kind of did that kind of online gaming, where you would meet people online, and that has really shifted the dial of where people's relationships are. That some of their support networks may not be here. They may be in Canada. They might be in Australia. They might be in India, and so young people's relationships are no longer bounded in quite the same way that we may have thought they were in the past. So knowing that that's happening and wanting to both help young people to navigate that space and also help them to remain safe in that space and use it in a healthy manner is a massive challenge for youth spaces. I think many youth organizations would like to see their young people off their screens more, and understandably so. But also we have to recognize that this is the world in which they're growing up. So providing good quality digital spaces, I think is really important. And it starts with all the infrastructure stuff of having high capacity mesh Wi-Fi, and importantly, having things like hardware filtering. So, getting friendly Wi-Fi certifications so that from a hardware point of view that you're blocking some of the content that you do not want young people to be exposed to, making sure that the digital equipment that you have is keeping pace with young people's use of technology, because you see this very quick crossover now that young people start off using tablets and very quickly move to mobile phones at around the age of 11. And that when you ask them how much they use laptops, it's very much focused on this is the stuff I do for school. So starting to think about just being able to get people doing stuff more on their own equipment is part of that. And in terms of the buildings themselves, making them be technically functional. So keyless staff entry and multi-user accounts that mean often you can save money on certain functions in the organization. Thinking about how you can use cloud operation tools, things like mobile tablet registers, so that you're gathering your impact data in a way that is quicker and more efficient than maybe we've done it in the past. Um, and all of that stuff that then helps to play into, does your building work for people who want to hire it, like using digital booking platforms to rent rooms rather than expecting somebody to phone up and hope that there's somebody on the desk who can answer their questions. So there is something really important about planning for this. Hopefully in your build, some of this stuff has been done already, but there's also an opportunity to keep looking at this and saying, how do I make my space both a really usable space for the digital world and a space where technology is being used effectively to support our mission and to help us to build a working sustainable organization. I think youth work can be really critical in preparing people to navigate the world that they're in now. So within youth work, I think we need to be engaging young people with some of those technologies so that we can do some of the things that I've listed on there below. So building that ethical evaluation, critical thinking skills to cope with AI, getting young people to understand that what they see in front of their eyes may not be what is true, understand that the messages that they're seeing may be generated and may not be true, may not be representative of what other people think, that they've just been generated in that way. Addressing job anxiety, there's a huge amount of concern amongst young people that AI is going to steal their jobs. The opportunities for them will be less because of it. And there's something youth clubs do that's really important in this, which I think can also become a great part of your narrative around why you're important in terms of economy, which is this piece around developing human-centric employability skills. AI can't teach you empathy, it can't teach you team working, it can't teach you a whole set of things that people need to do in the world of work. And so youth centres can both prepare young people to use digital equipment well, and also give them the skills to do the other bits of a job that they need to do. And I think framing what we do in that way is really important. Um, I think we've also got a huge role around navigating the Online Safety Act and the under 16 social media ban. I think there's going to be a whole set of things that happen within our youth organisations that challenge some of that stuff. As the under 16 social media ban happens, we're going to find that young people get better at circumventing that ban because they want to remain in those spaces. Understandably, for the ones who've already been in them, that is a world in which they exist, where they have friendships and relationships. As they become better at circumventing the ban on social media, they will also, by default, become better at avoiding some of the provisions of the Online Safety Act, which means that their access to content that really is, even more harmful will be possible. And so I think as youth organisations, we need to have a real think about what the implications of that are for safeguarding, for how we engage with young people, how we talk to them about social media and online content, and what we do with that. It's also going to have a challenge for many youth organizations that use social media as a communication tool and a promotion tool with their young people, that those young people in principle will no longer have access to that. So do you need to look as an organization at other channels and things that are not covered fully or in by the ban? So things like Discord and WhatsApp, where you can create different channels for youth contact rather than using things that you may have used previously to both, host work things that young people have done and to communicate with those young people. To do that, staff have to be trained. They have to be experienced. They have to be good at using the digital tools. They have to understand safe use of AI. They have to understand the legislation around things, all of that stuff. And I can't emphasize enough that we have to prepare our teams to be able to do that stuff. Um, Preparing them means making sure that they're able to meet young people in digital environments in safe ways. So this dual moderation type thing. Providing facilities and resources for young people to move from digital leisure to digital skills, where you turn their interests into the skills and opportunities. Considering hybrid provision, you've got a beautiful building, but the building can be much more than that. Some young people won't attend the building, some don't attend physically. Can you build the digital youth club around your club? Is there a way of doing that? Um, Really integrating some of the creative stuff into youth work, and there are so many great examples of that. I'm sure some of your organizations are already doing this really well, but podcasting, video editing, digital music production, all of those things which build literacy in using technology whilst young people are doing something that they are actually, interested in, focused on, enjoy. Um, and then managing online risks and screen harm through engagement and conversation with young people. I think there's no other way of doing this, of just, talking to young people about what they're experiencing online and talking to them about how they manage that space well. So great example of this soapbox in Islington, which Youth Hub, which was built around digitally, from the ground up. They make no bones about it. They are a digital youth hub. They are a STEM and digital hub. But an awful lot of what they do just looks like what a standard youth club would do. I guess what they've done is to kind of weave a set of digital skills based things, creative creator things, and just leisure time digital activities through almost everything they do. If you go on their website and you look at their calendar, their timetable of events, almost everything mentions STEM or digital within it somewhere. And it might be that they're doing cookery and it's still got an element of that in it. It might be that they're doing, art sessions, but it's still got an element of that in it. And alongside that, there are some things which are just purely there, esports, gaming stuff, digital music studio work. So making sure they have all the right equipment, all the right things to bring young people into a space and get them to do that work. Really focus then on saying, how do you move that from just being a leisure time activity that is a young person sat in front of a screen, which maybe we're trying to avoid them doing, to being a young person using a screen for something that develops their digital skills, their coding. They have the Young Islington Digital Creators in there. They have a Get Ahead employment program, which contains a big element on digital skills for employment. So you're kind of moving people through that process from leisure time activities to those harder outcomes around employability. But really, really good organization to go and have a little look at and see what they're doing. So an uncertain future. I mean, the it's not just the world of politics that's uncertain. It's everything. I'm looking out of my window right now, and there is a wildfire burning on the moors above me. You don't need to worry too much. It's quite a long way away. Um, but but climate change is happening in a very visible way in front of people now, and alongside that, there's a mental health crisis. And that mental health crisis stems from a set of anxieties about all the stuff we've talked before about a changing technology world, a changing political world, increasingly difficult and challenging news stories, and the constant exposure of young people to that news. Um, and so our youth clubs are dealing with young people who are more traumatized maybe than they have been in the past, have more experience of things that are concerning and worrying them, and suffer from greater anxiety. So, on the environment, over 50% of 17 to 25-year-olds say that they experience climate worry. Yeah. I think the answer to that is a really straightforward one. I think that we channel anxiety into practical activities that promote social action and agency, because I think people worry about things that they feel they can't do anything about. Where if we've put on activities that enable people to engage with an issue and then to really try to tackle that issue, I think that's one of the places that youth organizations generally have a huge opportunity to do that. In my own organization, we run a program called The Venturist, which works with much younger, 7 to 11-year-olds, and does exactly that. Goes in and talks to them about their anxieties and their worries, and gets them to come up with the solutions that they'd like to see, and gets them to deliver the local version of whatever that is. So, really thinking about how do you get young people to have agency around some of the challenges they're facing. Many of your buildings have been built with absolutely incredible environmental features. So, we've got organizations with solar panels, heat pumps, we've got organizations with absolutely first-class insulation. We've got, across the board, there are different models of doing this, but huge environmental improvements to the buildings. They can be living climate labs. They can be places where you actually use some of those features of building to engage young people in those conversations about climate change and about what they might like to see happen beyond your building itself, and talk to them about the positive action that they could take to tackle those issues. Um, and then, of course, there's an operational impact from doing that as well, that renewables and efficient buildings reduce core costs. And hopefully, many of the organizations who've had youth funded builds are finding that their buildings are more efficient. Certainly, the new modern methods of construction buildings should be incredibly efficient and should be reducing the costs of organizations who maybe had a drafty scout hut or a drafty church hall, and turning them into something that is efficient. Energy costs go down, thermal comfort improves for people. They're nicer places to be in and better spaces to be in. Um, and the argument that then goes back to our funders and that we need to build back into our communications is we're spending more money on direct delivery because we're not spending it on heating the outside. Great example of an organization who've done a lot of the stuff we've talked about on that previous slide is the Leaside Trust in Hackney, which is a charity which works on largely outdoor stuff with kids, but has a set of buildings as well. Um, and they have a net zero goal built right into the heart of what they do. They've done a huge amount of work on the infrastructure of renewable technology. So installing solar panels, heat pumps, huge environmental improvements to retrofit buildings and improve efficiency. But they've taken the view that they're not the right people to then engage young people with that environmental message, and have chosen instead to make a partnership with another local charity called EcoActive, who do environmental education. EcoActive are now a tenant of their building, and that's what where the kind of long-term sustainability of this comes from, is that these two organizations have now said, well, actually, we're going to share a space, and EcoActive now delivers environmental programs with the young people who attend the site, alongside Leaside doing its more mainstream activities. And I think if you can really think about how you create those virtuous relationships around some of this stuff, you can do something which enables young people to engage with an issue whilst also improving the sustainability of your organizations. The mental health crisis, which is really close to close to my heart, because I'm the chair of a mental health charity, and the reason for that is because I've seen youth mental health in my own family, and it's a dreadful thing. And NHS England now estimates that 1 in 5 young people between 8 and 25 have a probable mental health condition. It's a phenomenally large number of young people who have, often undiagnosed, often things they may not even recognize themselves as being a mental health condition, but have that. So our role as youth organisations is partly just about giving people the good, positive experiences in life that help them to manage their mental health. But there is also the opportunity to build the local partnerships with specialist VCSE organisations and the health system to support young people with those mental health challenges. And in looking at some of the YIF buildings and the YIF organisations, whilst putting this together, there are lots of examples of organisations who've now built some kind of counselling, that sort of stuff into their buildings. There's also lots of organisations who've done the second part of this, which is the spatial design of buildings to be conducive to people with, with mental health conditions or neurodiversity. So the flexible layouts, dedicated quiet and sensory rooms, alongside all the lively, noisy, bustling spaces of youth spaces, where people can retreat. And when they feel overwhelmed, then they can retreat to, and they can still have access to a space that doesn't force them back out because they feel uncomfortable within it. I think we should be doing as much as possible in this area because I think it's just so important to the young people and whether or not they then progress on to be, successful in their later lives. Um, Taco, one of the example organisations that we looked at, which £1.3 million youth investment fund into a town centre facility in Luton. Oops, moving the screen on it. So they've done exactly what we're talking about, building a hub that's both a hub for their own youth activity and a delivery venue for other organisations. It's a charity that have engaged with the complex needs of young people. So they deliver their own mental health provision and unlock daytime use for other organisations to come in and use that space um, and put counselling on site. So putting mental health right at the heart of that engagement with young people and treating it as being one of the core issues that a youth organisation is trying to deal with. So, again, I guess what I would be saying to you is as far as possible, as you look at your future strategy, don't look at your strategy in isolation from everybody else. You have out there hundreds and hundreds of examples of youth organizations who are doing different things and are doing them well. And going out and finding those examples and saying, which of these things could I replicate? Which of these things would work for the young people who attend my organization? Which of them would work for my organization financially? Is a huge part of getting this right. So before we move on to take any questions, just wanted to kind of finish on a kind of 5-point strategic compass for leaders and trustees. So this is taking some of the points out of the presentation above and sort of turning them into a set of things, questions that you can go back into your leadership teams and your boards with and say, have we done this? So the first one is alignment. Have you framed your impact around the statutory priorities and funder priorities of the organizations who have money? Yeah. So have you thought not about what the impact you understand you are delivering with young people is, but about what those organizations want to see and how you can frame what you do in the terms that they understand and will be happy to fund. And then how are you communicating this? Are you making sure that you are producing the kind of impact reports that go to the right people and are widely shared and contain information in the right format that enables people to say, I understand what that organization does and I understand how it matches with the priorities of my fund. Therefore, I'm going to be more well disposed to support them. The second one, the income mix. Have you done the work of mapping assets and capacity for the partnership and co-location? Because the one thing that the buildings give more than anything else is this thing about other people using that space and how you maximize the income from that building. So if you're going to do one thing on the income mix, this is the one that I would focus on first: trading, mapping assets, capacity, looking, even down to the level. We sat with a YMCA recently and just looked at Google Maps and said, you've got these sports pitches outside. Who near you might want to use them? And started to give them pin drops on maps of saying, well, that primary school hasn't got much outdoor space. Let's go and talk to them. That fire station over the road, maybe they've got a five-a-side team. Yeah. So really starting to say, I'm going to proactively go out and look for those partnerships and the people who might want to co-locate with me. Technology. Is your new venture future-proofed? Has YIF built all the things you need in? Or do you need to go out and say, well, actually, we still need to do some work on this. We still need to improve the digital the digital future of this organization. There are things that we still need to put in place. And I'd kind of, sometimes the youth investment fund money, because of its very heavy focus on very fixed capital, may not have provided everything you need because some of those things will have been outside the scope of the grant. So really thinking about where you might be able to go out and get that from. Digital practice. Are staff trained properly to NYA digital use standards? Are your sessions keeping pace with young people? Are you're building technology in a way through your building that encourages people to use it safely and to develop digital skills from it? Have you got a digital strategy? Fundamentally, have you thought about how the digital world interacts with what your organization does and with the young people that you work with? And is there something that you can do there that will really strengthen that? Um, and finally, and this covers off the whole of this, because I think once you really get this bit right, lots of the other stuff just follows from it. The tackling mental health, the dealing with, addressing climate change and climate change anxiety, digital practice, all of this stuff becomes sort of a natural process for people. Is youth co-design. Are young people actively leading the approach, the activities, the rules, the vibe, the feel of a place? And the environmental stewardship of your spaces. Are you really engaging them and really making sure that they are leading this? Because the best way to stay relevant for young people is to talk to young people all the time. And I'm sure that most of you already do that. But the more effort and energy that you can put into that real engagement with young people around what this space needs to be and what it might need to become is really critical. So at that point, I think we're going to leave the recording on just so that they can catch any questions. But Rookie, if you want to fire anything at me.